Hello again, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to our next session. This is a panel session specifically on the RPKI, and it'll be moderated by Mark Kosters, and I'll let him take it from there and introduce your panelists today.
Okay, great. Thanks, John. So I'm Mark Kosters. I'm CTO of ARIN. And one of the things that's very interesting to me is that Tom Daly gave a presentation yesterday for his keynote talking about new innovative services. And one of the things that he talked about was RPKI. And I was really glad to hear that for a couple of reasons. One is, even though this is something that y'all are seeing fairly recently, this is something that's been in the works for over a decade. So this is work that's been under development or has been deployed for a while, and we're starting to see some real traction within the community. And one of the things I like to do with the panelists here, Adam, Davenport, CF, Lagerfeldt, and Nimrod Levy, is talk about how this could be used within your enterprise. And hopefully when you leave this panel, you say, if you haven't been doing this already, that this is something that you'll look forward to implement within your own internet service provider. So I'm going to go to the next slide. What I'd like to show you here is, that you can see over time that we're starting to see accelerated growth on our number of people who are using RPKI within the ARIN region. And it's not true just within the ARIN region, but this is internationally with the other 4 regional registries as well. And one of the things I'll note here is very recently we started to see a lot more traffic with delegated using up-down. So this is it's because of new technology that's come out that's made it fairly easy for people to use. Most people are still using hosted solutions, which majority of our customers are using, and we'll talk about that more with the panelists about which solution that they've used, and so that you can see as you go forward what you should do. Here's the panelists putting the faces to the names: Adam, CF, and Nimrod, and working for GTT, Telecarrier, and AT&T respectively. And here's our agenda. So each of the panelists is going to talk about the current state of RPKI within their networks. And then we're going to go through a question session where each of the panelists is going to be asked questions about their planning and implementation, planning and testing stages, their implementation stage, as well as future phases. And if we have time afterwards, we'll open it up for questions. So let's go ahead and start the panelists. So the first question, I'm wondering, we'll start with you, Adam. If you could tell us a little bit about the state of your RPKI implementation.
Sure. Probably 4 to 6 weeks ago, we rolled out the final phase of our validation deployment. So we are now dropping invalids essentially at all borders, so peers and customers.
Great. And UCF?
Well, we started our journey by mid-2018 at Telia, and we finalized our deployment by last NANOG, beginning of February this year, by dropping both from customers and peers.
Excellent. And you, Nimrod?
So we've been dropping invalids on our peering edge since for about almost a year and a half now, since just prior to NANOG last February. And we're working on some solutions to filter routes that we learned from our customers. We're not filtering directly, dropping invalids on our customers, directly facing customer edges.
Okay. Are you planning to do so?
We're planning on, we're looking at some intermediate solutions where the effect will be that we won't be propagating invalids out to the world. I don't know that we're going to get a near term to where we're going to be directly filtering on every customer edge.
Okay, great. So let's talk about the planning and implementation that you had to do to make this all happen. And the first question I'd like to ask you guys is, how did you make RPKI a priority within your organization? And what was the business case to do so? So Adam, let's start with you.
Sure. We began seeing RPKI asked about in customer RFPs probably starting around 2 years ago. Within the last year, though, we've started seeing it become a requirement in those RFPs versus a would be nice. Additionally, we've had multiple existing customers experience what I'll call unauthorized announcement events that definitely cause direct impacts to their operations. So they were calling for it as well. And given kind of those factors, it was pretty easy to justify internally.
Okay. CF?
Well, I agree with Adam. We saw it about the same time frame. They started popping up in customer discussions in 2018, but also with the number of BGP hijacks at a large scale not declining. The opposite, really. We saw more often hijacks that took out hyperscalers and others. So we started a project at Telia, which was good for the internet, where we saw RPKI and also joining manners as steps to at least do our part in helping and make sure that the internet gets better and safer.
Okay. Nimrod,
Yeah.
And how about you?
So our path was a little bit different. I think we started earlier. My colleague, Jake Orkenhagen, has been very active in the IETF groups where the standards are being developed. And so he's been active in that realm for quite some time. And so we kind of pushed it, from a handful of individuals, really internally drove that to make it important to get it into the testing cycle and to get things ready and deployed. I'm not aware that it may have come from some customers' requests as well, but I'm not aware of that much.
Okay, great. I think it's kind of fascinating from Adam's perspective that there are RFPs that came out saying you need to have RPKI. I'm wondering if that's going to become more of a trend as we go forward. What do you guys think about that? Carl, what do you think?
Well, we already started seeing it, especially after, the press releases by last year. So, yeah, almost all of the bigger customers, they are requiring it or requiring the attendee to have a timeline for implementing it.
Okay, interesting. And Nimrod, I take it you too have also seen that, or maybe you've heard about it.
Yeah, so I'm not really in tune with the customer requirements coming in, but I think that that's a big motivator for all of us to do a lot of things. That this is what our customers want, so this is what we need to be doing. And so these are things that are really positive for the internet as a whole. We should be doing them.
Okay, great. So when you were going through this and you said, okay, I'm going to set up RPKI, I'm sure that you all put these things in your labs and actually trying to make this stuff work. What sort of steps did you do to make sure that when you were going to deploy the site, you felt like, hey, this is going to work out and this is going to work out in a pretty good way? Adam, let's start out with you.
Yeah, sure. We definitely deployed in the lab setup initially. You can only get so far in a lab environment, though. So for our, kind of live test, we identified 5 different boxes that were kind of all over the place in our network, different models, et cetera, and basically deployed full validation on those 5 devices to see, what, if any issues would arise. And probably not a super exciting answer, but honestly speaking, there weren't any real issues or catches that did pop up as part of this, and things went pretty well as expected. So we didn't really have any surprises there.
Okay. And Carl, what about you?
Well, we started actually rolling out also going by device type or software type and checking, okay, so how does it handle the RTR sessions and checking that it doesn't impact. And we started by marking all the received routes with a community depending on the validation state. This made us so we could track that in the NetFlow data and see how much traffic do we really have towards these destinations that are invalid prior to us making any decision. And that helped as well. We've seen a lot of small, tiny bugs, but we all work around the bugs that we have from day to day. So as long as you're aware of them, it's quite easy to actually implement this.
Okay. Nimrod, what about you?
Yeah, we did a lot of the same things. I mean, we did our deployment I think earlier than a lot of the larger networks. So we didn't have as much history of other folks to be able to play off of. And so we did exactly what Carl Fredrik mentioned there, is that we had our relying party software in place for a long time. We actually had the sessions put up to the routers without doing any actual filtering, but we had that in place from, I guess it was like October of 2018, before that previous NANOG, and so we were tagging routes and monitoring traffic and really trying to evaluate what the impacts would be. We'd already done our lab testing to make sure that we didn't expect any problems with the routers and the technology itself. It was really more of what is this policy going to do to real life traffic at that point. But it's your standard test and review and iterate and then deploy it kind of a process.
Great. So Nimrod, if you could just get a little bit closer to the mic, that would be useful. So I'm wondering, did any of you all have any surprises when you went from the lab environment to production, or was it just a really smooth rollout? And if there was any gotchas, are you willing to share any of the gotchas? So Adam, let's start with you.
Sure. I would say for the most part, it was pretty straightforward. We did have one kind of minor blip, I would say. Our particular vendor has an open bug that's RPKI related in certain scenarios. Pops a really disconcerting message, in the logs type thing. But upon further inspection, this is largely cosmetic and not a real issue. So basically, that was pretty much the only thing that we had pop up, and again, it ended up being more cosmetic than anything, and not impacting.
Non-impacting, excellent.
Yep.
And Carl, what about you?
We've only had one bug that has been service impacting for a very few customers, and it was with one vendor related to route dampening. When there was a Delta update received from one of the RTR caches the router was connected to. That is solved in releases that are popular by now, but nothing more than those tiny things. Okay.
And Nimrod, you?
Yeah, I don't think we saw any significant vendor bugs. There are things that we have to work around. Like we said, as long as you know those things going in, you can usually work around them. And I don't think we've seen anything significant. The thing that I think surprised me the most was the volume of traffic impacted. When we were doing our measurements, the amount of traffic that's associated with these invalid prefixes was so small that was what was really surprising.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. So that sort of brings up the sort of next question in terms of we sort of moved on into the implementation phase. So when you were doing this, there's a lot of people that have fears and say, hey, this is going to bog down my routers if I have to do this. I'm going to make mistakes, or something's going to happen which is going to impact my customers. Did you see any performance or operational impact with when origination validation was configured in on your routers? And were you concerned about that when you rolled these things out? And what is your advice to others as they go through this deployment scheme? Adam, let's start with you.
Sure. I mean, it was definitely a concern. We didn't see kind of any impact performance-wise in our lab testing, and then we, started testing in production on those, 5 devices that was mirrored. We didn't really see, anything there either, and we monitored pretty extensively for 3-4 weeks before looking to, kind of continue rolling out our deployment. But by and large, we just didn't really notice anything negatively one way or the other. So my advice would be is, try it out, make sure things look good on your platform. But generally speaking, it's the deployment has been pretty smooth and pretty straightforward.
Okay, great. CF, what about you?
Someone is muting me and then unmuting me all the time, just FYI. No, we also tested this in lab first, and we didn't really see any issues. What was interesting was this spring when more and more of our customers started enabling this, and we could see some interesting thing on some of our BGP sessions. And we know as we tested this for some time, we know of some of the smaller bugs that's something you should care about if you run up-to-date software, but some of our customers apparently don't do that. And what we can see there is a lot more route refresh being received on BGP sessions, actually consuming a fair bit of CPU usage on our routers. But so far, we've been able to cope with that. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. Nimrod, what about you?
We were concerned about performance when we tested. We didn't see anything in the lab, and we still don't see anything concerning in production. I'll also mention that Doug Montgomery over at NIST has done some testing on some of these sorts of things. I'm not sure if all of this data is published or not, but he's done some work where they tested with full tables of ROAs for everything, a fully signed table, a 50% signed table, 75% signed table, different combinations of amounts of signed prefixes, just to see how it would affect the platforms. And he really, from what I understand, had noticed negligible impact on that. So, even as the number of ROAs continues to grow, I don't expect that we're going to see any significant impact moving forward.
Okay, excellent. So what RPKI validation software are you all using, and how are they implemented and maintained, and do you have redundancy and monitoring configured? Adam, let's start with you.
Sure. We are using Fort Validator and Octo and Go. Basically, we've got 3 validator setups. Redundancy was a big concern of ours. So, we basically try to deploy these in a way that was redundant in all manners. Our validators are in different locations globally. They all run different, validation software. The validators are running on different hardware from different vendors. We even use different operating systems. But our goal was definitely to deploy without a single point of failure, which I think we did a pretty thorough job of. So far things have been looking pretty good.
Absolutely. That sounds great. What about you, CF?
Same thing here. So that was a major concern for us as well, especially what we saw in testing in the beginning, where there were really only the right validators available and before Routinator actually got stable. But we decided to not only offer, but have validators that are of different types, different software, but also spread them out geographically. So all of our routers connect to all of our validators spread out over the world, which makes it a little bit more redundant, I would say, as well. And we are running right now with only RPKI client from OpenBSD, together with GoRTR for the RTR function, and Routinator with included RTR support. We used to run OctRPKI, but rolled that back just a month ago. One thing that we monitor is also the output of all of these validators to make sure that they are in sync with one another, because there is some discussion in the community of how you should interpret RFC for invalid certificates and other things that make the validators on the market actually output different things as well. And in the comparisons then between the networks, you could say, okay, but they've implemented RPKI, but for some reason I see a few invalids. Well, there is a reason for that.
Yeah. Actually, you bring up a really good point, CF, and that is there's some things within the standards that need to be sort of clarified a bit, and especially with CRL's expiry, et cetera, that have seen and is definitely brings up interpretation sort of things that different vendors have done. So good point. Nimrod, what about you?
Yeah, we take the same approach. Multiple geographic locations, multiple vendors of relying party software. Right now, we're still running the Right v3 and as well as Routinator. We keep our eyes on the community and see what's coming if it's valid to make a change. And we also have some monitoring in place where we check what the routers see from those relying parties and make sure that we have a consistent view from all of those from every instance of the relying party software. And for any vendors that might be listening, it would be great to have an easier way to get telemetry for that versus screen scraping. Kind of ugly.
Great. Well, thank you so much. So let's go back. Let's go to the provisioning side. We talked about the validation side. Let's go about on actually creating ROAs within your own networks. And which solution are you guys using? And which regional registries are you touching? And what do you prefer? So Adam, let's start with you.
Sure. We've got IP space with, all the RIRs except maybe LACNIC. We've been creating ROAs for our own space with each of those. Right now it's being done manually. We admittedly just don't have that much IP address space that's ours, that we originate type thing. And that's been, that's worked out for us. I think, the process there is obviously a little bit different between the different RIRs, but by and large, it's, not overly complicated or anything like that. So it's been pretty straightforward there as well.
Okay. CF?
Yeah, we're going with the hosted solution that both RIPE, ARIN, and APNIC offers right now, at least. And same thing as Adam, we're tier 1. We don't originate that much IP space. We've had a few customers where we have delegated our own IP space to where we had to go through and sort out for them to create ROAS. But it's mostly gone very well, actually.
Okay. And Nimrod, what about you?
So I haven't been directly involved with creating any of the ROAs, but we do have some ROAs signed for parts of our IP space. My network's a little bit different, I guess. We have I'm a tier 1 transit provider, but I also have a lot of my own IP space for my consumer and wireless side. So we do have some of our ROAs signed for that. I look to a time at some point in the future where it's all been on the hosted solutions, primarily with ARIN. I look to a time in the future where we'll have a delegated setup that will integrate with our customer provisioning tools and where we'll be able to delegate to a customer and have them log in and essentially use our hosted or delegate to them as needed. But that'll be a fairly significant project of itself.
Excellent. So I have a question that's regarding your software in terms of actually dealing with repositories, going back to the actually validating the routes. And that is, what happens if one of the repositories where you need to gather your RPKI information is not available? What is your strategy in dealing with that? So Adam, what do you guys do?
Yeah, right now, basically, if that were to happen, we, would potentially just be accepting invalids, from those missing, ones. There's, other approaches there, and we're looking at different things all the time. But that's what would happen with us today.
Okay.
We would just accept it.
So you feel open, which is great.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. CF, what about you?
Yeah, we essentially have this same setup. We feel open. We will just accept invalids for the repository that's not available, but we do stagger the refreshes or updates on our validators. So if a repository goes down, we will theoretically have those still on our routers, the ROAs, for up to 1 hour, at least.
Okay. And Nimrod, what about you?
So I think Fredrik alluded to some of this earlier. There's some discussion in the community about how to handle some of those things. And like you said, The standards need to be clarified a little bit on how those situations get handled. From what I understand, the validators themselves keep things in cache for some period of time, and they'll use whatever the most recent information they have until I'm not sure exactly what it says, what it does, and it may vary from platform to platform, and then eventually it'll time out and will it'll fail open as everybody else says.
So as you go through this, one of the things that you probably heard John Kern say on Monday's talk when he was talking about IRR, he also ended the talk with some of the things that we're doing with RPKI within the ARIN's region. And one of the things that we've done is we've any of the rows that have been created within the hosted solution are actually propagated to the repositories within 5 minutes. What do you guys think about that? Is that an appropriate sort of time for it in terms of fetching, actually validating it? What do you think is sort of the correct? Adam?
Yeah, sorry, there's feedback from someone. I would say, obviously instant is always better, but in a perfect world, but 5 minutes to me seems reasonable.
Okay. CF?
Yeah, I don't have anything against that.
Okay. Nimrod?
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion about that in the past. I think I think it needs to be recognized that RPKI doesn't propagate at the speed of BGP. It's not routing information. It's a sideband. It's something a little bit different. And I think what we had before, where it updated 4 times a day, whatever it was, that's probably a little bit too long, a lot too long, maybe. And 5 minutes is pretty good. It makes things work. It lets us set a pretty reasonable propagation time from the time the user puts something in to it gets published in ARIN's database to when the caches fetch it, and then it propagates to the routers. So, we can reasonably expect propagation within an hour or so.
Okay. So one of the things that's kind of interesting about this, and there was a discussion about this at IETF a while back, and we're starting to move into future phases. And one of the things that's interesting about this is somewhat analogous to DNS, where there's a DNS change, there's a notification made to the secondaries that replicate that information from the primary master and DNS parlance to say, hey, look, my contents of my zone have changed. Please get this now. Do we need some sort of mechanism that says, hey, look, there's some change that's occurred. There's a new row that's been added, or there's been one that's been changed. Do we need to have the sort of a more sort of near real-time update feature built into RPKI? Or do we think that the periodicity of 5 minutes as some sort of number is good enough? Adam, what do you think?
Yeah, like I said, I think, whenever possible, instant is always good. That being said, I do think 5 minutes is reasonable. And from an operation standpoint, the difference between 5 minutes and near instant, may not be that big of an issue. Certainly in certain circumstances, it potentially could be, but I think by and large, probably okay.
Okay. Carl?
Yeah, the same. It's entirely.
Okay. And Nimrod?
I think as long as we manage those expectations and recognize, like I said, it isn't routing information. It doesn't propagate instantly. But it's pretty close. It's pretty good. We just have to know where that line is and know what to expect. I think it's a perfectly reasonable time frame.
Okay. Excellent. So RPKI only protects with origin validation. There's other things that we need to deal with in the routing infrastructure to secure. What sort of things do you think are important, and what sort of things do you think are working in IETF, like ASPA, for example? If that's useful, And finally, if ASPA is useful, what do people think about actually registering and letting people see their peers? So Adam, let's start with you.
Sure. I think path validation is very interesting. Obviously, right now we've got origin covered, but not full path. So I think that's, something worth looking at. There's potential implications there, but yeah, I definitely think it's very interesting. I think ASPA is definitely interesting. I think it's, and it's in the early stages. In terms of publishing, the peers, and then concern on that, as a transit-free tier one, you can see all my adjacencies in the routing table. So I personally don't have a problem with it, but I can definitely see why some might.
Okay. Fair enough. CF?
I think it's something that is needed, because if you look at the quality of the different IRR databases that we are dependent on today, some change is needed. And we're talking about authoritative or authentic, can be authorized, whatever records. We need some way of making sure that no one can just register a random entry in RADB and everyone will accept it. We need this as well, but one step at a time.
Excellent, thank you. And Nimrod?
I'm a big fan of the ideas that are being worked on, especially ASPA. I think that the concept makes a lot of sense. It's like we said, it's early. It needs some work. We need to see it get implemented. But that should be really, really interesting to do. As far as the publication of information, it's the same thing in the routing tables. The whole purpose of this is to be able to cryptographically verify things that are in the routing tables. So just because we've published it in RPKI, it doesn't make it any more well known than what we see in the routing tables. It just makes it authenticatable.
Excellent, thank you. So with that, those were the last of the prepared questions, and I'm going to turn it over to John Christoph to bring up what the audience has been asking about.
Very good. There's a handful of questions. We're going to try to squeeze in this short amount of time that we have. Mark, you asked a lot of questions, and you had to expect this. One of the questions that came in, it wasn't provoked by me or solicited. But essentially it's this, is there any planned changes to the RPA? So that's part one. It's actually a two-part question to the rest of the panel members. Are all of you using the ARIN tel or not? So go ahead, Mark.
So the best way of getting that answer is talking to John Curran, our president and CEO. He talked on Monday, and he's more than willing to his email address is well known, and you're more than welcome to reach out to him. So that is sort of the answer to the first question, and the rest is up to the rest of the participants, I would imagine. Adam?
Sure.
You're muted, Adam.
Sorry.
Maybe just a quick yes or no if you guys use the ARIN tel or not.
Hello. Sorry, my audio was in and out. Yes, we use all the tels from the RIRs. Yes.
Nimrod?
Yeah, we do validate on the ARIN tel as well.
And CF?
Yeah, we use all the tels from all the RIRs.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Next question. This specifically for Nimrod. What are the key barriers to enabling RPKI filtering on your customers? Are there potentially some enhancements that could address those barriers?
I think it's internal things primarily. We have a fairly diverse customer edge with a number of different platforms in play, and it's just so far it's been a lot of work to prioritize that. We haven't gotten there. We also have some pretty good route filters that we already, prefix list based route filters on all of our customer edges that we depend on, that have served us pretty well so far. It's neither one is a complete solution, but that's one of the things that's that's made it difficult. And then, so we like having those the prefix lists rather, in place, and just having the diversity on that edge on some of those platforms makes it difficult. It's partly a technical issue and partly just an internal prioritization.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question is for those of you on the panel. This probably excludes you, Mark, on this one. Is if you're rejecting routes, have you looked at what you're rejecting? Is there any patterns or trends to what you're rejecting the most?
Yeah, I would say, we've definitely kept close tabs on what we're rejecting, both in terms of prefixes and the traffic associated with those prefixes. And, there are certain networks that have more invalids than others, but I would say by and large, from our observation, it hasn't been a pattern, or, I can't say, the vast majority come from one source type thing. It's kind of been a spread. But like, Nimrod said earlier, I was surprised at how low the levels of impacted traffic ultimately were.
Okay, I'll take silence. That was a group answer. Next question is, currently there's about 130,000 ROAs. This person telling me, I assume that's true. But the number has no bound, the bound is very high. But someone could come along tomorrow and double that number or create a significant amount of disaggregation. Any concerns from either ARIN or the operators if that were to happen?
There are some suggestions in the community what to do with host-based ROAs. So you could essentially create a ROA for a specific host. And if you look at the IPv6 space, you could do that for every host address within a /48, and that would generate a considerable amount of ROAs. What we've been told right now is that there are some protection mechanisms within the RIR publishing tools so that won't happen. But otherwise, the way for us to securely manage our routers is to essentially not let anything bigger or more specific than what we would accept on our customer sessions through the validator as well. Meaning that we're only accepting /24s on IPv4 from our customers. We don't need to accept any ROA that is more specific than a /24. This goes aside with also RTPH having to function, and that's a totally separate discussion. But yeah, it's directly a problem, but we've been assured for now.
Okay. Thanks very much. Next question. If all so-called Tier 1 ISPs were to implement origin validation, what's the benefit for the customers behind them, enterprises, content providers, and so on, to implement RPKI or origin validation?
So I assume you're saying the question is for the downstreams to actually do validation themselves. And I'll admit that, we, by having all of the tier 1s, doing origin validation, we really take a significant bite out of the problem. Because, all of those routes are propagating through one or more of us, and so if we're doing that validation, then yes, our downstreams definitely, reap those benefits. That said, it's not that difficult as we've kind of walked through to get this going and to be able to do validations on your own. And it's great that we're doing it, but there's not really a whole lot of reason that larger enterprises, larger networks, non-tier 1s shouldn't be doing it also. Everybody can do it.
Thank you, Nimrod. Next question comes presumably someone from a small, maybe mid-size ISP, interested in the validator relying party best practices. What's the impact of a validator being down or unreachable? And is second part of the question is, would you recommend, or is advisable, or is acceptable to run the validator in, on a cloud provider for the network?
So there's been some discussion about some of those kinds of things as well. The impact of not having a validator be reachable has been, like we said, it's actually kind of similar to the repository not being available. you're just not getting information from that one validator. And the way the systems work, as long as you're receiving that information from any one validator, you have that protection. So the idea there would be to build that diversity, have multiple instances, so that you don't have that single point of failure. The question of running the validator in a cloud provider is a little bit different, because that goes to a matter of trust. Do you trust that your connectivity to that cloud provider, and then you haven't done that the crypto validations on your platform locally? So are you trusting them to have done that validation on your behalf? It's possible to do it. Is it a good idea? That you have to make that decision that what's right for your organization. These validators are not very heavy. It doesn't take very much VM to run it. The ones that we're running are pretty skinny, and it's not. They work pretty well. You can do it. You just have to figure out what's right for your organization.
Okay, thank you, Nimrod. And I'm afraid we still have lots of questions in the queue, but we're beginning to trespass on the time of the upcoming presentation. So we're going to have to end it here. Thank you all on behalf of NANOG and the program committee. I don't know if you had anything closing to say, Mark, but other than thanks to the panelists.
Yeah, I just want to thank you. Thank the panelists and the audience for listening in, and hopefully this helps encourage you to adopt RPKI as a first step of many steps that we need to take to secure our routing infrastructure. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. The next session will begin shortly.